Medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Just checking the sex.
Another boy. Hello and welcome. You're watching i24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. 14 IDF soldiers among 18 wounded as Lebanon's Iranian proxy Hezbollah fires missiles at a village in northern Israel. After meeting with the British and German foreign ministers in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will make its own decisions on security. And 19 dead in Oman, and Dubai forced to close its airport as heavy rain and flooding batter the Gulf states. Iran's Lebanese proxy Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for a drone attack on a village in northern Israel. 14 IDF soldiers were among 18 wounded, 4 of them seriously, when a community centre in the village of Arab al-Aramshe was hit. This just a day after Israel killed 3 Hezbollah fighters, including a brigade commander, in a strike in the south of Lebanon yesterday. Let's get the very latest with our Nicole Zedek, who joins us now from the north of Israel. Nicole, just talk us through what happened this lunchtime.
Yes, so the IDF coming out and confirming that 14 soldiers were injured, 6 of them seriously, 2 of them more moderate condition. But as you mentioned, the Galilee Medical Center says they're actually treating 18 people and say 1 of them is in critical condition. So the identity of those other 4 people is still unknown, but the reports that we're getting out in addition to the confirmation that the IDF says that their troops were using this community center in the Arab al-Aramshe town, which is right on the border with Lebanon. The reports coming out say that it was first an anti-tank missile that was fired from Lebanon. No sirens sounded in the area, and when that made impact, these soldiers started running towards a protected area. Meanwhile, a UAV, a drone that was riddled with explosives, also came through the area and was detonated. So once again, the IDF's also inspecting why that drone was not intercepted. So why these sirens did not sound and why the drone wasn't intercepted, 2 things that the IDF certainly needs to look at. Meanwhile, not long after that, as some medics were responding to the scene, there were 2 different rounds of red alert sirening, this time indicating rockets once again in the area. And as you mentioned, Hezbollah did claim responsibility for this attack, stating that they did fire different missiles and UAVs at the area, claiming they were targeting an Israeli military building in retaliation for the elimination of 2 of their senior Hezbollah commanders yesterday. The IDF confirming also that they did eliminate 1 commander of the Radwan forces and another commander of the coastal region for Hezbollah that was also responsible for planning and firing multiple different rocket and missile launches towards Israel throughout the course of this war. Now, right now, as we're coming on the air, we're getting some reports out of Lebanon about a deep strike in Lebanon, claiming an Israeli strike in the Baalbek region of Lebanon. This is not right on the southern border, on the border with Israel. This is much deeper inside Lebanese territory, but once again, these are just the initial reports. The IDF already did claim responsibility for retaliation to the Hezbollah strike on Arab al-Aramshe, saying that they were able to hit the site, that the launch, as well as other Hezbollah military infrastructure where some Hezbollah operatives were remaining as well. But all of those strikes on the southern border, really right there on the border town. So if we are getting more of these reports deeper inside Lebanon, this does indicate a stronger response coming from the IDF.
Nicole, thank you very much. Nicole Zedek there in the north of Israel. And we are seeing an escalation in the north as the world awaits Israel's response to that unprecedented attack by Iran on Saturday night. Let me introduce to you our studio guest this hour. Dr. Michael Oren is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Welcome. And Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. Thank you for being with us, both of you. So, I mean, let's just recap what the situation is already in the north of Israel. It's basically uninhabitable, isn't it? Large swathes of it. Tens of thousands of Israelis can't go back to their homes. I think 800 homes have been destroyed by Hezbollah missiles. Should Israel respond to Iran, to what happened on Saturday night, via Hezbollah?
Not exclusively. I think Israel's been maintaining a level of conflict with Hezbollah since last October, and has had significant successes, but it's no substitute for a response to 350 projectiles fired at us last Saturday night by Iran. That requires a different magnitude of response, and I think a more direct response. I think the problem is, for the last 15 years, we've been playing by the Iranian rules, which is Iran gets its proxies to shoot at us. We shoot back at the proxies. The proxies hide behind a civilian population, and Israel comes out branded as a war criminal every single time. And Iran gets away scot-free. This time, Iran can't get away scot-free, and we have to change the rules of the game. Every time there's an aggression by a proxy, the price has to be paid by Iran itself.
Benjamin, we're certainly seeing an escalation, aren't we, in the north?
Yeah, 2 weeks ago I was visiting injured soldiers in Sheba Hospital in Tel HaShomer in rehabilitation, and you meet a preponderance of those soldiers who've been injured in Gaza, who've lost their arms, lost their legs. And then I met a soldier who had lost an arm and who was paralyzed from the waist down. He was formerly of the Shayata, the Israeli Navy SEALs, and it had happened by way of a munition fired from southern Lebanon by Hezbollah into northern Israel. And he described the situation of the soldiers there as being that of sitting ducks. I'm a bit of a minority voice on this point. I don't think that I'm the only voice, but I believed that from the beginning, after the atrocity of October the 7th, Israel should have stayed its hand with regard to the Gaza Strip, definitely gone in there heavily and conclusively. Perhaps we'll talk about what remains to be done there during the course of the show. But first, they should have degraded dramatically Hezbollah's capabilities in southern Lebanon. They're a far more potent threat, far more dangerous threat, and I cannot see a scenario wherein any Israeli citizen would be well advised to return to the north under these current circumstances. It's frankly unforgivable of the government, in my opinion. All
right, well, let's bring in David Dowd. He's a Hezbollah and Lebanon Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, the FDD. Welcome to you, David. Good to see you. We are certainly seeing a rapid escalation in the north, aren't we, over the past 48 hours or so. Is this where we will see Israel's response to Iran, and in your opinion, should it be?
Thank you again for having me on. I don't know if I would describe this as an escalation. This has kind of been the new rules of the game that have been in the latest phase of the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah that has started when Hezbollah began its aggression against Israel on October 8th. The equation that has been set is that when Israel kills military commanders belonging to Hezbollah, Hezbollah tries to inflict pain upon Israel by targeting specific sensitive installations or sensitive locations, trying to draw blood, or at least trying to give the impression that it's drawing blood. And the Israelis then respond deeper and deeper into Lebanon. We're seeing this, as you noted in your report, with the Bekaa Valley. Israel has the upper hand in this case, and I think it needs to take advantage of it. It needs to stop working, I think, as former Ambassador Oren said, on the equations and the rules of engagement set by its adversaries, set by Hezbollah, set by Iran. It needs to set the rules of engagement for this conflict. Now, will a strike on Hezbollah substitute for a strike on Iran? Absolutely not. I think there is some kind of overlap. Hezbollah is Iran's star proxy. It's its primary extension. It does give Iran a border alongside Israel, which Iran itself doesn't have. So damaging Hezbollah does damage Iran indirectly, but I think there also needs to be a direct retaliation for the direct attack that occurred on Israel's sovereignty this last Saturday.
Well, Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy. We don't know how much Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah knew about what Iran was planning to do on Saturday night. But what do you imagine is the group's position on what happened? The missiles, of course, failed, and now Hezbollah could find itself in the firing line.
Look, I can't imagine that they didn't know. From the outset of their statements that they put out, they insisted that the retaliation would be Iranian. Nasrallah made this point several times in his speech on April the 8th, that the response would be Iranian. When they attacked themselves, the night of the attack was 12:35 a.m. They were conducting rocket attacks into Israel. They made clear that they weren't part of this retaliation. I think it's because there was a decision between them and the Iranians to keep Hezbollah out of this and not give Israel the international legitimacy to conduct more intense military action against Hezbollah. That's something they want to avoid. I also don't know if it's right to call the Iranian attack failed. It was intercepted. We don't know if this was meant to be a symbolic strike. There's a lot of a lot of analysis that said that Iran meant this to be symbolic. Had it not been for the interceptions by the Israeli Air Force, by Israel's missile defense system, by the allies of the Israelis, Jordan, the British, the French, the United States, we don't know how much damage Iran had actually intended to do. And I think that's something to take into consideration when Israel plans its response and how it decides what its posture should be for the day after.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Dowd there at the FDD. And just to get your reaction to what you just heard from David Dowd, that we don't know how much Hezbollah knew about what Iran was planning to do, but it could now, of course, find itself in the firing line.
Yes, but as Ambassador Oren said, and as I thought from the outset as well, there's been a fundamental changing of the rules of this macabre game, okay? It was a situation whereby their proxies would hit us and so on and so forth, but once you've got a direct attempted strike, and I wouldn't call it a failed strike, I agree with that description, it was an intercepted strike. Once you have a direct strike from Iran onto sovereign Israel, Israel must strike back into sovereign Iran. Now, it can do that at a time of its choosing. It can do that with all of the canning that we would hope that they would apply to such a strike. And I think that needs to come sooner rather than later. But we can also certainly strike at the proxies in our north, in southern Lebanon, and hit Hezbollah. As I said, should have done it a long time ago. It would be high time for doing so now.
You agree with that?
So interviewing with the international press, Saturday through today, you encountered this narrative a lot, that Iran sent this as a message. It broadcasts its intentions. It coordinates. Even people say it coordinated with the United States, with Turkey. It sent slow-moving drones ahead of the cruise missiles. It gave us plenty of time to get our defensive act together and take down all of these projectiles. I don't buy it. I don't find many people here who buy it. And the fact of the matter is, if one of these rockets, and these rockets are significantly longer than the length of this studio, with 500 kilograms of explosives, which is enough not to take down a building, but to take out a neighborhood. If one of them had gotten through and killed 1,000 Israelis, we'd been in a completely different situation today. And there's no way that the Iranians could have known in advance that all of these projectiles would have been intercepted. And if they did think that, it was an outrageous gamble.
All right, thank you. Well, Israel's allies are pressing it to limit its response to Iran following Tehran's drone and missile attack on Saturday night. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been meeting with the German and British foreign ministers in Jerusalem. Our Middle East correspondent, Ari Losseran, has more.
As it braces for Israel's expected retaliation to its massive attack over the weekend, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi used an army parade to threaten Israel against any retaliation.
If the Zionist regime makes the slightest move to violate our territory and harm the national interests of the Islamic Republic, they must understand they will face a severe and heavy response.
The annual parade was diverted from its traditional route and, unusually, was not broadcast live on state TV. Authorities gave no explanation for the move, which may have been to avoid becoming a target.
The plan of action for True Promise was a limited operation. It was not a comprehensive and extensive plan. Had it, the retaliation against Israel, been a much larger action, then the supports of the Zionist regime would have seen that nothing would have remained of the Zionist regime.
Thank you. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the German and British foreign ministers urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to limit Israel's response to Iran. Netanyahu says Israel will respond in a way it sees fit.
It's right to be here in Israel today to show solidarity after that appalling attack by Iran. We made clear our views yesterday about what should happen next, but we also said Israel is an independent sovereign country and gets to make these choices.
I thank our nation's friends for their support in the defense of the State of Israel, both in supporting us in words and also with an active support. They also have all kinds of suggestions and advice. I appreciate that. But I wish to make one thing clear. We will make our decisions ourselves, and the State of Israel will do everything necessary to defend itself.
While Saturday's drone and missile attack largely failed, Israeli intelligence also failed to foresee the massive nature of it. And from the pressure from its allies to the unpredictability of Iran's response, Israel has many things to consider as it chooses how to respond.
So, Ambassador Oren, an awful lot of pressure on Israel from its allies which helped shoot down those Iranian missiles on Saturday night, for Israel to limit its response. I mean, its hands are really tied here.
Yeah, well, we can't do that now, can we? we have to respond, and or else the message gets out to the entire region that you can fire, hundreds of rockets at us with impunity, and you can't do that, and that would deeply compromise our fundamental security. So you explain to our allies, yes, we understand. We're going to be smart in doing this. We're maybe not respond in kind by sending hundreds of projectiles at Tehran. Iran is a target-rich environment for Israel. There are many ways we can respond to this. There are oil facilities along the Persian Gulf.
Iranian oil fields?
That could go up in smoke, in flames, very easy. There are the regime itself is very vulnerable right now. It's shaky. The economy is shaky. A highly unpopular regime. We could deepen that unpopularity in various ways. There are vulnerabilities before cyber attacks. There's different ways we can do this that will not risk, igniting the entire region and some kind of conflagration, because that's what our allies fear most. Ways that will maintain the axis, the alliance that was revealed last Saturday night between us and the moderate Sunni states. And this can be a way. This is going to be, it's threading a very narrow needle, but I think Israel can do it.
All right. And Benjamin, there is an argument as well that Israel should not squander the international goodwill it's currently enjoying, at least from its allies.
I'd like to talk about something adjacent to this. I think that there's a real concern that this could end up being a macrocosm for the microcosm that we saw with regard to Gaza and the State of Israel. You had rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip year on year on year since our disengagement from there. And year on year on year, our air defense got better and better. Our people remained terrorized, however. And all the while, the strength of the air defense systems that we had brought our leaders to what I would describe as analysis paralysis, no decisive policy with regard to the Gaza Strip. I don't want to see that overlaid onto the nation entire.
On a bigger scale.
On a much bigger scale, on a macrocosmic scale, when you have rockets, ballistic missiles fired at the State of Israel, just as the citizens of the South have been for many, many years, the entire country is paralyzed as a consequence of terror. Okay, that cannot be permitted. It cannot be tolerated. And all we have to realize is that as we defend, our enemies continue to get more calculated. They continue to get stronger and stronger. God forbid we should face the equivalent of a macrocosmic October 7th, the way that we did on October 7th as a consequence of our misdirected attention when it came to the rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip.
All right, well, let's go back to Saturday night for a moment, because there was a powerful display of military technology. The defence against Iran's attack demonstrated the strength of the US-led Israel-Sunni alliance defence infrastructure. Could Israel now leverage this moment to push for a deeper anti-Iran alliance? With more on that, our correspondent Robert Swift.
Several factors came together to blunt Iran's unprecedented attack against Israel earlier this week. Israeli intelligence and military innovation, advanced Western weapons technology, and the combined power of cooperative action.
Thanks to unprecedented cooperation in coalition led by the United States, Britain, France, and other countries, which is in itself a great strategic achievement in the Middle East, the Iranian attack was thwarted. I think that considering this, the possibilities available to Israel are wider.
US-led coordination allowed for intelligence and radar data sharing and freedom of operation in different airspaces, including with several Gulf Arab states that passed on time-sensitive information, enabling the defense. The success of this strategy and the possibilities it could yield to Israel going forward may explain Jerusalem's delay in responding to the strikes.
We have an opportunity to establish a strategic alliance against the grave threat from Iran.
Billed by its advocates as a NATO-like pact in the Middle East, a partnership between Israel and Gulf Arab states could be the next step on the path set out by the Abraham Accords. But while states such as the UAE and even Saudi Arabia may be warming their ties with Israel, they are doing the same with Iran, walking a balancing act. Their actions could be seen as intended to reduce the risk of war in the Middle East, rather than to support Israel. Nonetheless, diplomatic options are available to Jerusalem, if it can play its cards right.
So, Ambassador Oren, I mean, one of the upsides, if you can call it that, of Saturday's attack is that it showed that this US-led Sunni Israeli defense mechanism works.
It works. Okay, and then how do you preserve it? How do you expand it? Listen, I believe that there's a great historic opportunity here. If the United States would take the lead on it, it'd be wonderful. It's not easy because you have 15 years of Democratic Party policy which seeks to reconcile with Iran. So you have to do a 180-degree turn and go from reconciliation to confrontation. And the United States, the Biden administration would come to the Middle East and say, okay, we're going to really build up this alliance. We're going to build this alliance not just as a defensive alliance, but also as an offensive capabilities, give Israel the means to defend itself. We don't have all the means. We do not have strategic bombers. We only have fighter bombers, which are small and carry relatively small payloads. We could address the Palestinian issue within that framework, which would be very interesting. We could conclude a peace treaty between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and we could transform the entire region. It really begins with the United States acknowledging the fact that Iran is what links Hezbollah, Hamas, and this attack Saturday night. And Iran is a source of instability, violence, and war in the Middle East. And it's a hard turn for America to make in an election year, but a necessary one.
Do you see a glimmer of hope there? And does the United States have the backs of its Sunni allies? We saw, of course, what happened when President Biden came into the White House. One of the first things he did was to criticize Saudi Arabia, call it a pariah state. I mean, do you think that has changed?
And one of the first things he did was to try to renew the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, of course.
That didn't play so well with neither with Israel nor with our Sunni allies. Now that's got to change, and that's basically calling on the president to acknowledge that the policy of seeking reconciliation with the Ayatollahs in Iran is a failed policy, and say, okay, we're going to switch. We're going to swivel.
In an election year, of course.
In election year. It's not easy. By the way, when a lot of people are out there protesting, pro-Palestinian protesters are protesting in support of Iran.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting Democratic Party convention, isn't it? Benjamin, your view on that?
Yeah, I do see a glimmer of hope here, but I don't think that the fact that they worked in a coordinated fashion to down this attempted strike by Iran gives them any right to dictate the terms of our response or retaliation to the Iranians. That's the first thing. And then also you have the recalcitrants who just will not see that which is right in front of them, such as the infinitely wise Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign minister, who said, when they were moving towards the notion of sanctioning Iran, something which is supposed to placate Israel, incidentally, that if there are biting sanctions, perhaps Israel doesn't need to actually respond to the Iranians. Joseph Borrell said, well, I would think it's over, but I need to have proof that the IRGC is actually engaged in terror from a credible state. I mean, the temerity and audacity of an individual like that.
Yeah, okay. All right, Benjamin, thank you very much. Well, Turkey's foreign minister, meanwhile, has revealed that he met with the Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Doha. Hakan Fidan is in Doha for talks with the Qatari leadership. And last night, Turkey's President Erdogan said Israel's prime minister was to blame for Iran's attack on Saturday night. Let's go to Istanbul. We're joined by journalist Ayla Jean-Yakli. And Ayla Jean, Turkey has embraced Hamas for many years now, hasn't it? Hamas leaders have lived between Turkey and Qatar. This is not really a surprise, is it? This is a kind of an extension of that policy.
Yes, Turkey doesn't recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization. And when the issue of their presence in Turkey, their physical presence in Turkey has come up, they've said repeatedly that members of Hamas are free to come and go. That said, I think that it would be quite a difficult foreign policy challenge for Turkey if somebody like Ismail Haniyeh were to relocate here more permanently. When Fidan met him in Qatar, we know from Turkish diplomatic sources that they talked about, at least what they revealed was pretty general notions such as, increasing humanitarian aid to Gaza, ceasefire negotiations, and the state of Israeli hostages. So that might indicate that Turkey is still trying to carve out some kind of mediation role here, that it still sees its influence with Hamas as being something that might lead to one of those things, such as the release of hostages or a ceasefire potentially.
Okay. Well, we've just been talking about how the US and its allies in the region work together to thwart Iran's attack or to shoot down the missiles. Are there concerns in Turkey that it's being left out of this very important alliance?
I think that, over the last few months, Turkey has sought and perhaps, been disappointed by the fact that it hasn't had a bigger role in negotiating some kind of truce or even, greater access for humanitarian aid to Gaza. But I don't think it's necessarily surprised, or at least it shouldn't be surprised that it's left out. What's been notable since Iran's attack on Israel is a lack of condemnation from the Turkish side. So I think that is quite telling. And, without some kind of at least very basic statement expressing concern about what happened to Israel, it's difficult for Turkey to expect that it would have some kind of more meaningful role.
What are Turkey's main fears about an all-out war between Israel and Iran?
That's something that the foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, has expressed worry about. I mean, he's, over the course of the last few months, he has said that he sees the conflict in Gaza as either resulting ultimately in a great peace or a great war. And he has said that Turkey does prefer a great peace, the former. So Turkey is worried about a regional war. That's something that it's very much on alert for. But there are some domestic concerns here. Might be surprising for some of your viewers, but Erdogan's party did very poorly in recent nationwide municipal elections. That didn't affect Erdogan's tenure in government, but his party did see a great setback to its lowest level of support since it came to power 20 years ago. And one of the reasons that party officials have said is behind that decline in support has been Erdogan's stance on Israel. As sharp as his rhetoric has been against Israel, things like trade have continued. And some of this might be an effort to, placate the unhappy masses over his treatment of Israel. So.
Interesting. Aylacine, thank you very much indeed. Aylacine Yakli there in Istanbul. We're taking a short break. When we come back, Qatar's Prime Minister says hostage talks have stalled. We'll have the details next.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds. We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Games Paris 2024 is the entire world together. Routes through all of France.
Oh, Kalinike!
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel. Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back. Well, with the region on high alert amid a potential Israeli response to Iran, Qatar's Prime Minister says that talks to secure a hostage release and truce in Gaza have stalled. Here's Qatar's Prime Minister speaking earlier.
Unfortunately, the negotiations are between moving forward and stumbling. At this stage, we're going through a sensitive phase with some stumbling. We are trying as much as possible to address and solve the stumbling, to move forward, and to put an end to the suffering of the people of Gaza, and to ensure the release of the hostages at the same time.
Just a few days out from Passover, devastating news for the families of the 133 people who are still being held in Gaza. Let's go down to central Tel Aviv. Balir Sladin is there, where some of the supporters of the families of the hostages are gathering. What's happening, Balir?
Yes, so definitely after what the Prime Minister of Qatar has said, that the negotiations are faltering. Actually, now, of course, it's a very bad news here at the hostages square. But we know, according to some reports, that the Americans are trying a different path right now. The director of the CIA, William Burns, has asked his counterpart, his Turkish counterpart specifically, to take part in these negotiations, apparently because the efforts by the Qataris and also the Egyptians were not successful. We also know that today the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan went to Qatar, went to Doha, and met with Ismail Haniyeh, the chief of Hamas there. And we also know that Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh is going to travel to Turkey to meet with Erdogan, the president of Turkey. So maybe we will see now Turkey taking part in this negotiations, but that's happening while the of course the situation between Turkey and Israel is not at its best, to say the least, because of the latest developments and the latest statements by Erdogan, as we've heard him since the 7th of October attack. And now this is happening while in the Arab world, a diplomatic Arab source, apparently an Egyptian, told ABC News that the talks about the hostage deal are frozen due to the focus on a possible escalation with Iran. And today the IDF military chief Herzi Halevi said to the fighters that fighting for the release of the hostages is a supreme mission. And what we see from the families of the hostages side, they are asking for a change of a path. They are saying that the government needs to take a different path right now, and they are criticizing the latest developments in Gaza, especially the increase of aid for the Gazans. They see this as a negative development because they think right now Sinwar has no pressure on him, so why would he release the hostages right now?
Balir, thank you very much. Balir Sladin there in the centre of Tel Aviv. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Dr. Michael Oren is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, and Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. Ambassador Oren, Hamas has refused every offer of a ceasefire, prisoner release, you name it. Qatar today saying the talks have stalled. Once again, we've heard that so many times. What should Israel do now?
Surprise, surprise. I mean, why? Why would Sinwar give up what he regards as solid assets in return for anything less than survival? Which is what he wants, okay? And the message he's been getting from Washington, from other European capitals, has been hold on for another week or two. Wait for a situation where another 100 or 200 or 1,000 Palestinian civilians die. and the world will impose a ceasefire on Israel without conditions, without giving up hostages at all. Or at least creating situations which are conducive for a hostage for permanent ceasefire exchange. And he's going to hold out for that.
For all or nothing.
Yeah, sure. Why not? And what does he have to lose?
Yeah, right. Benjamin, I mean, there is enormous international pressure on Israel from its allies not to respond to Iran and also not to go into Rafah, the last Hamas strongholds in Gaza. What can Israel do now, essentially? Once again, hands are tied.
No, I don't think Israel's hands are tied necessarily, but I think that it's in desperate need of some bold decision-making. The reality is that we lost momentum when we took that dreadful pause around the beginning of Ramadan. And the only reason that we ought to have paused would have been, didn't take place, but would have been if hostages were being released, similar to the first time that took place. That did not occur, and therefore the Israel Defense Forces should have pressed on into Rafah. By the way, you cannot prevent the resurgence and re-emergence and rearming of Hamas without taking Rafah and then holding the crossing between the Gaza Strip and the Sinai
Peninsula. Do you think the IDF
Peninsula.
will still go into Rafah?
Do I think that they will? I hope that they will. I believe that we have the capabilities to do so, and I don't believe that we require any support from the international community in order to obey the call of the citizens of the States of Israel, which is to go in and finish this job. Let's not forget the horrors of October 7th. Let's not forget the fact this was well within our gift to achieve. We can destroy the remaining battalions of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip, and I don't think that we should have lost the momentum. I'm hopeful that we'll regain it and press on.
Going back to Saturday night, Ambassador Oren, I mean, Jordan was among the countries that helped shoot down those missiles. King Abdullah has taken an awful lot of heat for that. You know, and we have seen a lot of instability in Jordan lately. Pictures from Rafah could upset the balance dramatically, could it not? It's very
it could,
situation.
but what is the alternative? You know, I agree that we have no choice but to go into Rafah, that it's essential for our security. Jordan has its own priorities, not the least of which is Iranian subversion. They have been moving and providing material support, logistical support to opposition groups, radical Islamic groups within Jordan, trying to take down the Jordanian government. So Jordan has its own reasons for standing up to Iran, not just by aiding us, and keep that in mind. Going into Rafah, there's no such move here that's not going to carry a cost. Whether it's retaliating against Iran or going into Rafah, it has a cost. At the end of the day, I firmly believe we have absolutely no choice. And I think that the majority of Israelis understand that in these issues, there's no compromising Israel's fundamental security.
All right. Well, a few weeks ago, of course, IDF troops withdrew from Khan Yunis, the city in the centre of Gaza. Some pictures coming out today on Israeli media. I think we can have a look at that now. These are pictures from inside Gaza. Can we bring those pictures up of the beach in Gaza? You can see lots of people. Can we see the pictures? I can. There we go. All right. So this is going around on Israeli media today. There you can see civilians, you know, at the beach, people swimming. Certainly doesn't look like a war zone. We'll have to wait and see if these pictures make it around the world. But I mean, Benjamin, what does this tell us about the operations in Gaza right now?
Well, it tells me a few things. First of all, the government continues to describe what's going on inside the Gaza Strip as a war. But with all due respect to the Nachal Brigade, which I hold in very, very high esteem, the presence of one brigade, the last brigade inside the Gaza Strip, the presence of a single brigade inside the Gaza Strip does not a war make. Nothing of the kind, nothing of the sort. At best, it's holding a particular area, which we know about. That beach that you're showing there, and I hadn't seen that before, but I can tell you I go running pretty regularly on the beach of Rishon LeZion, and it's no more populated than is that beach there that you're saying is the Gaza Strip. Also, militarily, tactically, the presence of civilians in these areas is a hugely complicating factor for the efficacy of the Israel Defense Forces when and if it comes to ramping up operations inside the Gaza Strip. And it kowtows to one of the demands of Sinwar, which is to allow Gazans to return north. This is a huge mistake and a huge, huge error. Look, wars have a momentum that they take on. We lost that momentum, as I said, prior to Ramadan. militaries are either moving forward or they're moving backward. They should not be stagnant. I strongly suggest that we move forward into Rafah.
Does this suggest, Ambassador Oren, that Israel has at least now got on top of the aid issue? It's taking an awful lot of heat for that for a long time.
We've said for weeks that we've gotten on top of the aid issues, and the issue wasn't the amount of aid, but it was the distribution of aid. I mean, my personal feeling is that we should have flooded Gaza with aid from the very beginning.
That was a mistake too.
That was a mistake. You know, I'm keen on pointing out all these mistakes, but we sound like Monday morning quarterbacks here. But from the beginning, I talked about the need to give aid because there was a misunderstanding or a misconception in this country that by withholding aid, you put pressure on Hamas. And the fact of the matter is Hamas actually wants Palestinians to starve. So by withholding aid, you were actually serving Hamas and increasing international pressure on Israel. The main idea, the only goal was to give time and space for the IDF to act. And you did that by removing other issues that would have blocked that time and space. I want to say one last thing about this picture that you kept on showing, and that is I'm sure in the international press, they're going to say that these people on the beach are looking for food.
Yeah, that's not what the picture suggests, but yeah.
It doesn't matter. They're all swimming out to get aid. They've been dropped in the ocean. I'm certain of it.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised either, I have to say. Benjamin.
Yeah, just Ambassador Oren used the phrase Monday morning quarterback. I was with him in the United States prior to October 7th, and I witnessed him say that a war is coming. He didn't define exactly what and in what terms, but I'm not wrong, am I? I remember you saying
I'm adding a book to the Bible, my prophecies. Yes, no, I had been very certain that war was coming before this because of the United States brokering a peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia that had a nuclear component, and that I said simply that Iran would not sit quietly and let Saudi Arabia get nuclear power. It's not going to happen. It's interesting, even now they keep on talking about doing it again and assuming that somehow Iran was going to sit quietly. They're not.
Even with that, politely, I strongly disagree with the idea of flooding the Gaza Strip with aid. I think that it gives Hamas the opportunity to act as though it is taking care of the welfare of Gazans, and I think that it was an error.
It was an error to...
I think to flood it with aid is an error, and if there is to be a humanitarian gesture, let it be reciprocated by the humanitarian gesture of giving as our hostages.
The error was not in flooding. The error was not taking responsibility for the distribution.
Opening the Erez crossing.
For the distribution. We gave the distribution over to the UN and others, and Hamas took it from the UN and others. But we had to be in charge of the distribution.
I mean, it has been a huge advantage for Hamas to be able to use that against Israel.
It's been a huge advantage for Hamas, but I would again say, and Ambassador Oren is among the most skilled statesmen that the State of Israel has. By the way, I'd like to see him be foreign minister right now. I'd like to see him be foreign minister yesterday.
Yeah.
But
we paid for this airtime.
No. But with that having been said, I think that the presence of the aid had to have been conditioned on the release of the hostages. It's very straightforward in my mind. Flooding them with aid, I don't think is necessary. Avoiding famine is necessary. It's something that we've done. But I do think that it needed to be conditioned on our people coming home.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, Iran is a major manufacturer of drones. It supplies Hezbollah in Lebanon, it supplies the Houthis in Yemen, and Russia, of course, in its war on Ukraine. Omar Rabi and Alex Schloss explain now what are the capabilities of Iran's drones and how much of a threat do they pose to the global order.
Over 300 drones flooded the skies of the Middle East on their way from Iran towards Israel in what is considered the largest drone attack in history. The attack consolidated Iran's position as a major player in the world of drones, as all of those launched were produced by Iran in Iran, rather than relying on Western components. The attack largely relied on two types of drones: the Mohajer, a reconnaissance drone that can carry surveillance equipment, as well as explosive payloads, and is capable of remaining airborne for 24 hours. The other drone is the now infamous Shahid drone, a suicide drone used extensively by Russia in its ongoing campaign in Ukraine. Its small size makes it harder to detect with radar, but it remains easy to intercept because of its slow speed and low altitude. International sanctions have prevented Iran from obtaining high-tech weapons, but instead of blocking Iran from obtaining drone capabilities, it has forced Iran to rely on locally manufactured weapons instead. But to obtain still necessary parts for its drones, Iran relies on Asian components and front companies that illegally obtain parts from Europe and the US. It's estimated that Iran possesses tens of thousands of drones, which it stores in underground bunkers, making the exact size of its fleet hard to determine, and more importantly, hard to destroy. So long as Iran remains a major drone proliferator, its proxies throughout the Middle East will continue to be well supplied.
Well, Israel also produces drones and has just opened a drone manufacturing plant in Morocco. Bluebird Aerial Systems is partly owned by Israel Aerospace Industries. Morocco and Israel established ties under the Abraham Accords back in 2020. For more on that, we can go to Rabat. We're joined by Dr. Mohamed Shtatou, a political analyst and senior professor at the University of Rabat. Great to see you as always, Professor. Thank you for being with us. Is this a sign then that despite the pretty strong anti-Israeli feeling that we've seen among some people in Morocco, defence cooperation continues apace?
Well, the alliance is still on, and it's going very strong as usual, as in the last 2 years. And the opening of this factory of drones is very important. It shows that both countries are trying to make drones in Morocco for sale in other countries in Africa, bearing in mind that many African countries now are realizing the importance of drones in fighting insurgencies and in fighting Islamists and in fighting all kind of brigandry in their countries. So there'll be a future for these drones in the African continent.
And is Morocco interested in defence technology as well? We saw an extremely impressive display of aerial defence here in Israel over the weekend, of course.
Yes, of course, Morocco is very interested. That is why there is this cooperation, which is a win-win cooperation for both Israel and Morocco. And I think it's going to continue crescendo in the future after this war in the Middle East. I think things will go to a higher note, and the cooperation will produce more weaponry, use more of the Israeli technology for use in Morocco and for also sale in other countries in the region.
And how is the government managing to balance this defence cooperation with deep, strong anti-Israel sentiment in Morocco?
Well, it's doing very well. And I think our cooperation with Israel has been going on for 2 years now, and it's been extremely fruitful for both countries, and it will continue. Obviously, I don't think the public says anything that anything is wrong with that. On the contrary, the public probably is with this idea of making drones, making technology, weaponry in Morocco.
And I mean, how is the prospect, the very alarming prospect of an all-out war between Iran and Israel being covered in Morocco?
Well, I think, like the rest of the world, it's been on the news, but I don't think there was much of reaction from the population, as far as I know for the moment, because this war is going too far, and everybody's thinking that probably we are on the threshold of a regional war, and that should not be a good thing for the Middle East and for peace between the Arabs and the Palestinians and the Israelis.
But how do people see Iran in Morocco? Do they see Iran as a kind of a champion of the Palestinian people, or do they see it as an enemy of the Arab people? How is it seen there?
As you know, the Sunnis are all against Iran, and people see Iran as a kind of problem in the region because it's behind so many groups, so many proxies, Hezbollah and other proxies in the region. So I don't think people see it as a very positive friend.
Professor Shtatou, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Let's get a final word from Ambassador Oren and Benjamin Anthony still with me in the studio. Yeah, it's interesting to see how it's
very interesting. Listen, what happened last Saturday night, among other things, was a very good advertisement for Israeli technology and the sale of that technology. And we're talking about the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 and David Slings, the intermediate level missile, which are joint U.S.-Israel projects. Iron Dome, which is an Israeli project with American backing. But here you have the world's only multi-layered combat-tested system, anti-missile system. And there are many customers that are going to line up to buy this. And so, okay, we dodged that bullet, but in terms of sheer financial gain, last Saturday night was a bonanza.
And if you connect the dots globally, Benjamin, you've got Iran selling drones to Russia. Here are the Europeans, lecturing Israel on how it should respond to Iran. And they might very well have their own problems with Vladimir Putin on their doorstep.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about some positive outcomes of what's taken place. I remember walking in Tel Aviv in 1991. I heard the word patriot. We were dependent upon the Americans for a very, very, very uncertain system of air defense against the Scads from Iraq. What a great advancement we've made since then. Also, the alliance of the Abraham Accords has held up. I thought it would be stress tested by a protracted war in the Gaza Strip. That's not been the case. But it's only going to hold up as long as we can project strength. And the more potent our response to Iran is, the more decisive our response to Iran is, the stronger those alliances will remain, the more durable they will prove, and the more likely it will be that they can be expanded. So I hope to see all of those things occur and take place.
Right.
There's an interesting...
Give war a chance.
Yeah, well, right. There's an interesting paradox, though. It's right that Israel has to be seen to be strong in the neighborhood. It has to be seen to be compassionate in the West. And that is kind of...
It is very difficult.
Causing problems, isn't it?
But the countries, the Abraham Accord countries, other countries in the Middle East face twin existential threats in the form of Sunni extremism, Shiite extremism. There's one country that's standing up to both of them. This is it, the state of Israel. And this is why we have to prevail. We win the war, we get the peace.
All right. Benjamin?
Yeah, I completely agree. We're on the front line of that combat, that clash of civilizations. The only problem is the Western powers, I don't believe, quite recognize it yet.
All right, Benjamin, Anthony, Ambassador Ora, thank you very much indeed to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, looking elsewhere in the region, at least 18 people have died in Oman. Dubai, meanwhile, has been forced to close its airport after heavy rain and flooding across the Gulf states. Our Dikshi Arvind has this report.
Passengers remain stuck in Dubai airport as flights were forced to cancel or reroute due to severe weather. Heavy rains are battering the Gulf states. The rains ongoing for the past few days and causing flash floods in countries like Oman, the UAE, Bahrain, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The weather has been so severe that Oman's health ministry reported the death toll has increased to 18 people due to flash floods. Some countries are even recording a year-and-a-half worth of rain in a day. Dubai, for example, getting 5 inches of rain on Tuesday, the amount which usually falls over the course of an entire year. Scientists link this weather to climate change as the planet gets warmer. The dry, arid regions are now facing greater and more disastrous rains and floods. There have also been flash floods in 23 provinces in Afghanistan, killing 66 people. More than 63,000 acres of land has been damaged, and approximately 1,200 families have been affected due to this weather.
About 200 acres of people's agricultural lands in this village have been destroyed by the flood. The crops were almost ready to harvest, but the flood destroyed them all.
South Asian countries have been subject to unpredictable climate changes, including extreme heat waves and cataclysmic flash floods, and they continue to witness such severe weather conditions.
Well, let's go to Dubai for the very latest. Our correspondent Bastien Bory joins us now. Bastien, pretty shocking images coming out of the UAE today. What's happening?
Well, the reason I'm talking to you from my living room is that the roads to the studio are impassable. We've just seen those images of flying sofas and planes rolling through 3 feet of water. The most affected regions in the UAE actually got 200 millimeters of rain in just 12 hours, while on average the country gets 100 millimeters in a year. And yes, most of the countries affected, as we just heard, one Emirati man died, 18 people died in Oman, mostly school children. There were countless emergency calls here, especially in Dubai, for collapsed roofs, flooded cellars, power cuts. And it appears that the biggest, I mean, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but the biggest damage was mostly on recent houses, recently built villas that are not equipped with waterproofing systems. The real estate brokers deeming it, this equipment unnecessary and leaving it up to the new owners to decide whether or not to do additional work. And yet many residents choose not to do so. And here's the result.
Well, yeah, they might have to rethink that, mightn't they? There have been some reports, Bastien, that this is the fault of cloud seeding. This is something the UAE does, extremely sophisticated technology to try and induce rainfall in a very dry part of the world. Is that true?
This country receives a little rain naturally every year, but it's true that there's also something called rain enhancement. It's a technique, as you said, that was developed in the 90s, actually, in the UAE, in collaboration with NASA. And the idea is pretty simple. It's a way of extracting more rain from a cloud. So when the rain starts to fall, planes and drones take off, fly through the clouds, and throw a mixture of salt particles and electric charges, which literally creates rain or increases the phenomenon if it's already happening. And that's what happened yesterday. There are about 200 of these cloud seeding missions per year in the UAE, and the damage on the ground caused by these enhanced rains, let's call it that way, are not always covered by insurance companies. Policyholders must make sure to add the clause when they sign their contract.
We're used to hearing about drought in this part of the world. There's not enough rain, there's not enough water. Is this just a sign, Bastien, of the increasingly extreme weather events that we are seeing all around the world?
It's true. I mean, Middle East, especially this part of the Middle East in the Gulf, is one of the most vulnerable regions to climate change because of water scarcity and also faster than average temperature increases. And at around 550 liters per day, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, per person water consumption is well above the world average. I think it's about 200 liters, the world average. So yes, this country will become increasingly water stressed in the future as temperatures will continue to rise throughout the 21st century. So the UAE has, and the Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Oman, all these countries have to consider new ways of securing supplies that would not cause environmental harm to Gulf waters, of course.
And just before you go, just to talk a bit more about where you are, I mean, Dubai is one of the most advanced cities on earth. What is the official advice? What are they telling you to do there?
Well, as I told you, the roads to the studio are closed. It's impossible to drive right now. It's a red alert today and tomorrow. People are advised to stay at home, of course. And some people are less lucky, in more popular neighborhoods. The infrastructure are in much worse quality, so the water is going in their apartments, and they have to remove all this. So it's a pretty difficult situation in some neighborhoods of Dubai.
Yeah, there's going to be a big cleanup. Thankfully, no lives lost as yet, but we'll keep a close eye on that. Thank you very much, Bastien Bourri there in Dubai.
Good evening.
Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Many thanks for watching. Do stay with us here on I24 News. Kalev Ben David is here next. Good night.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque.
News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 194 of Israel at war. While there was tension on all fronts today, a major blow against Israel came in the north, where explosive drones launched by Hezbollah from South Lebanon struck a community center in the village of Arab el-Aramsheh, injuring 18 people there, 14 soldiers and 4 civilians, 6 of them seriously wounded. Hezbollah said the attack was a response to Israel's success in killing 3 of its operatives yesterday in Lebanon, including one of its top field commanders. Israel responded with several airstrikes throughout the day, targeting Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Although Arab el-Aramsheh lies just 2 kilometers south of the Lebanese border, air sirens reportedly did not activate during the attack. The IDF said it is investigating. And joining me in studio, we have Ambassador Daniel Sheck, Director of Diplomacy of the Hostage and Missing Families Forum, former Israeli Ambassador to France, Reserves Major General Eitan Dango, former Military Secretary to 3 defense ministers, former head of COGAT, and Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves Jonathan Conriquez, former international spokesperson for the IDF, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, no air defense is hermetic, especially that close to the border. But is something like this supposed to happen? A drone getting through and hitting at a place where the soldiers were gathering or even staying?
No, it's not supposed to happen, and it has been thwarted many, many times in the past during these 6 months. These are the type of weapons that Hezbollah uses extensively in order to hit tactical targets within close distance, relatively close distances to the border. They're faster, they're smaller, these drones. They have a smaller radio silhouette, so it's radio silhouette, so it's more difficult to intercept them and see them. That is probably the reason why they weren't detected and there was no alarm. But I specifically know of other drones, just like these ones, that have been shot down by the IDF in the past. The IDF will have to investigate why this one specifically was able to descend upon this structure and cause the unfortunate result that we've seen. But all in all, I think what we're seeing along the northern border, Israel with significant tactical success, Hezbollah responding to that, and then the IDF raising again the bar and responding to the Hezbollah response. All in all, more activity, more fire, more tension along the northern border.
Right, more activity, more fire, more tension, Eitan. Is this at any way? Is it just the response to the IDF taking out 3 commanders yesterday? Is it related to what's going on with Iran right now? Because we have seen an uptick even before today. I think it seems we have seen an uptick in Iran's, in Hezbollah's activity and fire along the north.
I think that you have to separate and then to see the picture together between Hezbollah and Iran. Separately, Hezbollah is reacting against what they faced in the last 48 hours. 3 times the IDF succeed to kill or to target. 2 of these targeting were one of the main, let's say, field commanders that has a lot of knowledge, responsibility, and really it's difficult to fulfill their place in the immediate time. And I think it joined to the number of 30 commanders or Hezbollah high senior officers on the operative level that were targeting. On the other end, IDF, concerning what happened today, as it was said, has to investigate. We cannot allow ourselves to have such events that will be on the border, on the post. And if you ask me, we are going to escalation between IDF and Hezbollah. In my opinion, after what happened with Iran, probably Hezbollah got green line to expand its more, let's say, activities, not to expand them to the depth, but under the area, geographical area that is running today, there is, let's say, a chance that it will be increased. Let's see what will be IDF reaction in the depths. On the other end, Iran, concerning the Israeli reaction towards Iran, is under a question mark. And it looks like we have to...
Well, Eitan, I'm going to put that off because we're going to get to that and discuss that more in depth.
Just to sum up, in my opinion, we are on a level of escalation between Israel and Hezbollah in the coming days.
Let's go to our correspondent, Nicole Sedek, who is right outside there, the village of Arab al-Rashma. That's a danger zone from what we're hearing, Nicole. Tell us what you're seeing, hearing there.
Yes, well, we are actually...
Okay, it looks like we lost the feed there. Okay, we'll reconnect. We'll reconnect with Nicole. Don't know what went on there. Daniel, I do want to ask you, because escalation with Hezbollah is going to also involve diplomatic considerations. The U.S., right from the beginning, even while supporting Israel in Gaza, has been in some sense trying to restrain or discourage Israel widening the conflict to Hezbollah at this time. How much is that going to have to play in Israel's decisions how to make the response here?
Well, clearly you're right about the U.S., but it's not just the U.S. It's actually a coalition that resembles the one that formed around Israel last Saturday night with the Iranian attack. It's also the French that are very much involved in Lebanon and really wouldn't like to see Lebanon being dragged into an all-out war. And it's, generally speaking, the European powers and Western powers who simply are trying to contain as best they can the situation in Lebanon. So just a word, I mean, you try to dissect this into, is this attack a response to that attack? And is that attack caused by the previous attack? There's a war going on there for the last 6 months. So it's, I'm not sure that there's a point in trying to understand each of these attacks, what they mean and why they happen. They happen every day. Unfortunately, sometimes they are more devastating than others.
All right, our correspondent Nicole Tzedek was told to relocate by the IDF because that is a danger zone, and I hope at some point in the broadcast we will be able to reconnect with her as she's out there. Now, as we've discussed, this is all connected to the situation with Iran. Of course, Hezbollah acting, one could almost say, as a proxy on the behest of Iran. Now, the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom and the Foreign Minister of Germany arrived in Israel today for a solidarity visit, this following the weekend's attack by Iran. In separate meetings with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they voiced hope that Israel's expected retaliation against Iran would be limited. Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iranian President Raisi is threatening Israel with a harsh response to any further attack. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
As it braces for Israel's expected retaliation to its massive attack over the weekend, Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi used an army parade to threaten Israel against any retaliation.
If the Zionist regime makes the slightest move to violate our territory and harm the national interests of the Islamic Republic, they must understand they will face a severe and heavy response.
The annual parade was diverted from its traditional route and, unusually, was not broadcast live on state TV. Authorities gave no explanation for the move, which may have been to avoid becoming a target.
The plan of action for True Promise was a limited operation. It was not a comprehensive and extensive plan. Had it, the retaliation against Israel, been a much larger action, then the supporters of the Zionist regime would have seen that nothing would have remained of the Zionist regime.
Thank you. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the German and British foreign ministers urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to limit Israel's response to Iran. Netanyahu says Israel will respond in a way it sees fit.
It's right to be here in Israel today to show solidarity after that appalling attack by Iran. We made clear our views yesterday about what should happen next, but we also said Israel is an independent sovereign country and gets to make these choices.
I thank our nation's friends for their support in the defense of the State of Israel, both in supporting us in words and also with an active support. They also have all kinds of suggestions and advice. I appreciate that. But I wish to make one thing clear. We will make our decisions ourselves, and the State of Israel will do everything necessary to defend itself.
While Saturday's drone and missile attack largely failed, Israeli intelligence also failed to foresee the massive nature of it. And from the pressure from its allies to the unpredictability of Iran's response, Israel has many things to consider as it chooses how to respond.
Jonathan, is basically Israel, in a sense, has said it's going to respond in a way. But again, expectations being raised. How is Israel? What is the most likely response going to be? As the Prime Minister, in some ways, boxed himself into a corner?
I see it differently. I see it as Israel, of course, has to respond to an attack of this magnitude and severity. The fact that it failed doesn't mean that we don't have to respond to it. I think in the rules of the Middle East and in any war, if you're attacked, you have to respond. I think Israel has an opportunity here, and what Israel probably is doing now is leveraging the fear amongst European and other countries in order to make good diplomatic advances when it comes to either sanctions, designations, or otherwise advancing Israeli strategies against Iran.
Such as against its nuclear program.
Against its nuclear program, against the Quds Force, against the IRGC in general. There's a multitude of things that are wrong with Iran that need to be fixed, and you mentioned 3 of them. And I think that what Israel is doing now, quite wisely, is not attacking immediately, letting the Iranians wait and prepare and anticipate for an attack, but in the meantime advancing diplomatic needs of the State of Israel, which is very good. Eventually Israel will retaliate, but I think that we also have to factor in the whole situation in Rafah. and our hostages, that maybe Israel will want to translate the achievements that we did in successfully defending, together with our allies, successfully defending during Saturday, and to translate that currency into new action in Gaza in order to advance the goals of the war there. It might go either way. It might go first Iran and then Gaza. My assessment is that I think we will first focus on the closest part, which is Gaza, and then move on.
Well, let me ask a veteran diplomat, how far can Israel diplomatically leverage that? Can it, for example, use that currency to proceed in Rafah, which we know these same countries don't want to see happen?
You want the short answer? No.
Okay.
I don't think that that can work. I mean, it doesn't mean that Israel won't make a move in Rafah, but will it make a move with the support of those who all along were against it? I don't see that happening. I don't think that is possible. On the other hand, what was just said about leveraging this situation for sanctions against Iran, that I think is definitely something that is on the cards and that should be tried. I don't know if you can have it both ways. If you can make these diplomatic advances and then decide that you retaliate militarily without losing ground on the other side. I honestly don't know.
I guess it would depend on what kind of military action is involved. But I do want to go back. We have our Nicole Sedek there, who has shifted locations. Nicole, just bring us up to date what's happening there and what's happening to you there as well.
Well, it's clearly a very dangerous location that we're in, Kalev, and that's why the IDF is telling us to move a little bit. This location right here in Aram Sheikh, it's right on the border with Lebanon, maybe 2 kilometers away. So certainly one of the areas that had been evacuated. But as of last week, the residents themselves, many of them decided to come back here. So it's been interesting as we're driving through what should be deserted streets, especially following this very dangerous incident we saw today. 18 people injured in both different missile and drone launches from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They're being treated at the hospital in various condition. The IDF saying that 14 of them were soldiers, 6 of them in serious condition, and the Galilee Medical Center saying 1 person also being treated in critical condition. So the other identity of those 4 others that are not soldiers, according to the IDF, their identity is still unknown. But this did hit a community center here in this village. And so this certainly shows that even if the IDF was inside the building, this is a civilian infrastructure as well. But what is, for the most part, so interesting was we're going around still seeing kids riding their bicycles, people outside on their balconies. And really, I think this is the first sign of life in this village for the past 6 months, with them coming back just about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, many of them. And so even given the daily cross-border attacks, when you can see Lebanon when the sun is still up right through over the hills here. And so still with that, many of the residents here in the north say it's not enough to deter them, because with no end in sight for when they might be able to safely return home, many of them are saying we want to be home now. And that's certainly what it seems to be we are seeing here.
Right, and I just want to check, how is there concern with those civilians there? And we've seen this especially in some of the Israeli Arab and Druze communities there, the residents either wanting to come back or staying there. How much concern is there that there could be another attack on that community?
Certainly quite a bit of concern, especially considering the IDF's retaliation. These reports coming out of Lebanon that the IDF is striking deep inside Lebanon in the Baalbek region. This is not right on the border with southern Lebanon, as we do see these daily cross-border attacks. This is maybe 100 kilometers inside Lebanon. So the much further, which could indicate a more of a stronger retaliation following the dangerous incident that we did see today. And so as we were just pushed away from the military, from the civilian center that we were standing in front of, they said this is not an area that anyone should be in. They said it's very dangerous for us to be here, and that's why they were urging us to leave the area, because with the ongoing activity, it should always be expected that there's any sort of retaliation in all of these border communities, not just here, but throughout the day. We had seen different border and red alerts sirening all along the Lebanon border, as we continue to see really every day, Kalev.
All right, Nicole Sedek there at Arab El Aramsha, the scene of today's attack. And please, Nicole, you and the other correspondents from our sister Arab and French channels, stay close to shelter and take cover as need be. Thank you so much, Nicole. All right, that was our reporting from the north. Gentlemen, I want to continue the discussion on Iran, but I want to raise another argument now that it's being used to try and dissuade Israel from carrying out a military response to Iran's attack, and that is the opportunity it generated to create a joint Mideast alliance against Iran with some of the Arab countries that aided in the downing of Israel's aerial arsenal, whether those countries admit it publicly or not. Could Israel leverage this moment to push for an alliance against Iran in this region, or an initiative that could be derailed if the conflict escalates in the coming days? Our Robert Swift takes a closer look.
Several factors came together to blunt Iran's unprecedented attack against Israel earlier this week. Israeli intelligence and military innovation, advanced Western weapons technology, and the combined power of cooperative action. Thanks to unprecedented cooperation in coalition led by the United States, Britain, France, and other countries, which is in itself a great strategic achievement in the Middle East, the Iranian attack was thwarted. I think that considering this, the possibilities available to Israel are wider. US-led coordination allowed for intelligence and radar data sharing and freedom of operation in different airspaces, including with several Gulf Arab states that passed on time-sensitive information, enabling the defense. The success of this strategy and the possibilities it could yield to Israel going forward may explain Jerusalem's delay in responding to the strikes.
We have an opportunity to establish a strategic alliance against the grave threat from Iran.
Billed by its advocates as a NATO-like pact in the Middle East, a partnership between Israel and Gulf Arab states could be the next step on the path set out by the Abraham Accords. But while states such as the UAE and even Saudi Arabia may be warming their ties with Israel, they are doing the same with Iran, walking a balancing act. Their actions could be seen as intended to reduce the risk of war in the Middle East, rather than to support Israel. Nonetheless, diplomatic options are available to Jerusalem, if it can play its cards right.
Eitan, this was one of the strategic goals of Israel before October 7th, to see an alliance, some call it an Arab NATO, against Iran, where Israel could at the very least be sort of a silent partner. Should that be taken in consideration when weighing how to respond to Iran?
I think we have to see very clearly that this kind of block of allies, cooperation, coordination, it's for defensive activities. I don't see now any chance to see this kind of coalition going for the offensive attack. If we are going to respond in targeting or making something of attack inside Iran, I don't think that the Arab moderate countries will take a part. You see that there is a very close difference, and you have to keep the achievements by achieving this kind of block of moderate Arab countries with Western countries together under the United States roof, together in order to cooperate, and they work on it for a long time, and it's running for the policy to the way of operational activities. But the Israeli choice now to go to the area of political achievements like the G7 meetings with sanctions, or to respond in a low level, under the radar, by having some statements that we have the time, we have to react, I support it, but the timing of reaction should be chosen, in my opinion, in a very smart way. Or the third one, to make a very clear offensive attack on Iran, to teach that the Israeli aircraft should come there, and I'm convinced without it that we can be there. In my opinion, from these three cases, looking for the South. And I may say that my combination is to see the release of the hostages as the main issue. We have to centralize on it. Second issue, Hezbollah. Iran should know we have open space to air to on reaction.
I think there's a kind of a consensus here that that's the priority now for Israel, Rafah, and dealing also with the hostages and other things we'll have to briefly, Jonathan.
Yeah, briefly. I don't think that it's mutually exclusive to retaliate against Iran and to build a coalition. These things can support each other. I agree that the Arab countries may not necessarily want to participate, but I don't think that it's exclusive.
All right. Right. It's just a matter of timing on it.
Yep.
Gentlemen, I want to move on briefly, actually, to New York, because UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is the main aid organization in Gaza, has been under fire since revelations that some of its employees have colluded with Hamas, either in carrying out or maybe covering up terrorist activities. Several donor nations, including the U.S., have suspended their funding of UNRWA, and in response, the UN Secretary General has ordered an investigation, although its critics have questioned the objectivity of a UN-led probe. Now, UNRWA is the subject of a Security Council briefing today. With more, let's go to our correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, our senior U.S. correspondent, who is at the UN headquarters. And, Mike, tell us about this situation with UNRWA and how it's developing.
Well, there's actually two parallel investigations ongoing right now dealing with UNRWA, Kalev. One is an internal investigation linked to allegations that 12 UNRWA staff participated in the October 7th massacre. There's also a separate, broader investigation that was actually called for by the UNRWA Commissioner General, Philip Lazzarini, to take a look at risk management in hiring and neutrality issues within UNRWA. And that's being run by a separate review group led by the former French Foreign Minister, Catherine Colonna. That review group will issue its final report coming up on Saturday. Critics say it will simply be a whitewash based on the institutions that are part of that review group and their prior comments on UNRWA. But the UN as a whole says that the review group has the credibility needed to point out any potential problems with UNRWA's neutrality in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This particular Security Council meeting this afternoon, Philip Lazzarini, the Commissioner General, will be here in person to brief the Council. It will largely have to deal, I believe, with financial issues. UNRWA is at a crossroads right now. They've been struggling financially for years, obviously because the population of the Palestinians keeps going up. That means more money needs to be outlaid for services. Meanwhile, donations keep going down. And in the aftermath of October 7th, in the allegations that staff participated in the massacre, as you mentioned, many countries cut out or at least suspended their donations. Some have since resumed them, although the United States, the biggest donor country, will not resume funding until at least March of next year, per a congressional bill that was signed by President Joe Biden a few weeks ago. So it's unclear where the money will come from here to sustain services for UNRWA, and obviously that is a point of a great concern, the paramount concern, it seems, for Philip Lazzarini. I think another point he'll make here is pointing out what he believes, or what he's accused Israel of doing in obstructing humanitarian aid going into Gaza. He's been screaming from the rooftops there about what he feels is Israel's purposeful starving, essentially, of Gazans there since October 7th and the counteroffensive launched by the Israeli military. Obviously, Israel has disputed those allegations. Lazzarini, though, I'm sure will bring his own facts and figures to the Security Council meeting today to try to push the Council to push Israel more to get more aid flowing and scale up the aid going into Gaza here in the coming days.
Right. Very briefly, Mike, a vote on Palestinian statehood or no, admission of Palestine as a nation state coming to the Security Council this week?
It will come to the Council. There's a committee on new memberships that looked at the old Palestinian membership application from 2011. The committee, unsurprisingly, could not reach consensus over whether they should recommend a vote. However, Algeria, the de facto representative on the Security Council to the Palestinians and the larger Arab world, put forth their own resolution to bring the Palestinian application for full membership to a vote. It was originally scheduled for tomorrow, following the regularly scheduled Israeli-Palestinian Security Council meeting that's held each month. It was then pushed off to Friday. Now it might be back on Thursday. Either way, we'll have a vote this week. And either way, I guarantee you, the U.S. will veto it.
For sure. Mike Wagenheim there in UN headquarters in New York. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, please stay with us. We'll focus a little more on Gaza, but we are going out for a brief break. Stay with us on this special broadcast on I-24 News, day 194 of Israel at War.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels, now on Hot.
Just checking the sex.
Another boy. Yeah.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, day 194 of Israel at War. Survivors of the horrific massacre at the Nova Festival on October 7th, where hundreds of people were killed and many more left severely traumatized, are now blaming the government for leaving them behind and not offering enough support. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more in this report, which we warn you does contain some difficult images and testimony.
They tried desperately to escape. All these cars left at the side of the road tell the story of those who didn't succeed. 364 people were killed and thousands raped, mutilated, and traumatized at the Nova Music Festival in Israel by hundreds of armed Hamas terrorists who burst through the border with the Gaza Strip on October 7th and massacred everyone in sight. In one day, they brutally killed 1,200 people and took over 240 hostages. For those who survived, life will never be the same. And some are criticizing the government for not offering enough support to help deal with the trauma.
מכל אזור בגוף שלי.
I was covered by bodies over every part of my body. I hid under one specific body every time the terrorists came. The body punctured and bled on me from everywhere. I lifted its head and put its cheek over mine, and this is how I protected my body. So if a bullet hit me, it wouldn't hit my head. The terrorists didn't stop coming. I called the police non-stop, and the answer I got was, a police car is on its way. I got this answer for the duration of 6 hours. I was hiding for a total of 8 hours. The last 2 hours, I gave up and didn't call anyone. And indeed, cars did come by. But unfortunately, they were terrorist cars who came to shoot at us again and again. Does anyone have any doubt that I'm going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life?
We need treatment now and not to go back to work a month after it happened. There is no me. I have anxiety, flashbacks. I'm waking up at night. I experience this event again and again.
The survivors blaming the government for its failure on October 7th and every day since then.
I think that the government is confused. It's been very confused for several months now. It needs to get a grip and understand that it is not just the survivors and their parents. It is siblings, uncles, cousins, grandfathers, grandmothers, friends who cannot function.
At the parliamentary committee hearing, one survivor said nearly 50 people who survived the festival have since died by suicide.
This number was true 2 months ago. It could be much higher now, and there are many more who have been forcibly hospitalized. I have lots of friends who don't get out of bed. I can still barely go outside.
The Israeli Health Ministry denies this claim and says the number is not known by the medical system.
And unfortunately, even worse off than the Nova survivors are the 133 hostages still being held in Gaza. Now, negotiations to obtain their freedom in return for a temporary ceasefire and some other conditions seem to be at a standstill, with Hamas reportedly standing firm on its condition of a complete and permanent withdrawal of IDF forces from Gaza. Qatar has been a key player as a mediator, with some saying more Western pressure should be put on the Gulf state that plays host to Hamas's political leadership. Here's what Qatar's prime minister had to say today on the hostage negotiations.
Unfortunately, the negotiations are between moving forward and stumbling. At this stage, we are going through a sensitive phase with some stumbling. We are trying as much as possible to address and solve the stumbling, to move forward, and to put an end to the suffering of the people of Gaza, and to ensure the release of the hostages at the same time.
For more, let's go to our correspondent Balir Sladin, who's at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. And Balir, the Qatari PM, saying the talks are stumbling and not even clear if they're even making that much movement. And this is looks as we move into the Jewish holiday of Passover, Pesach, the holiday of freedom. It looks like it's going to be a grim, difficult holiday for those families.
Unfortunately, that's the situation. And also, development from a few minutes ago, the Qatar Prime Minister is adding, and he's saying there are politicians using Qatar for their own political interests. We will decide whether we will continue our role in the negotiations. So as we see it, the Qataris are now reconsidering their role as a mediator between Israel and Hamas. Maybe that's after the Hamas latest response, the decline of the American proposal in the last couple of days. And now we are seeing another development. The CIA Director William Burns a couple of days ago asked his Turkish counterpart to take part in the negotiations. Apparently, the Americans now want the Turks actually to get in, and that's because of the efforts by the Qataris and the Egyptians that were not successful, to say the least. And that's happening while the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan today met with Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas chief, in Doha. Maybe that's one meeting before the meeting of Erdogan with Haniyeh in Ankara in the coming days, according to some reports. So apparently these developments, we can understand that they indicate that there will be a change in the mediators, and maybe we will see Turkish pressure now on Hamas. Of course, that's not the best that Israel can hope for, because Turkey and Israel are not getting getting along lately, especially after the October 7th attack and the statements by Erdogan that we've heard over and over again. Him calling the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and describing him as a modern-day Hitler. That's, of course, something that is not acceptable by the Israelis. And this is happening while an Arab source told ABC News that the talks about the hostages are frozen, and that's due to the focus right now on the escalation with Iran, the escalation in the Middle East. That's, of course, very sad news for the families here that are telling me that the government now needs to take a different path, because they are criticizing right now the latest development in Gaza. They are saying that the aid, the increase of aid, as we can see in Gaza, is making it, it's not putting pressure on the Hamas chief there, Yahya Sinwar, and he doesn't need to do anything now in order to actually get the aid in. So why would he actually release the hostages? That's what they are telling me here.
All right, Balir Sladin, thank you so much there at Hostage Square. Daniel Sheck, you've been involved in the hostage issue closely, working with the forum. I just want to get your reaction to these developments.
Well, you know, the only thing that's not in a standstill is the situation of the hostages themselves. The negotiations might be at a standstill or frozen or whatever you call it. But the clock is ticking, and it's ticking, and it's ticking, and the composition of the list of 133 might be changing as we speak in the proportion between live hostages and dead hostages, and unfortunately that list changes only in one direction. So, you know, I'm a bit at a loss what exactly should be done here. And the thing is that, you know, the IDF has kept, and the government has kept saying that only military pressure will bring the Hamas leaders to change their minds. Where is that military pressure?
Let me go to Eitan.
Is there military pressure?
Because we do, it is something of a confusing picture. Both of you, Eitan and Jonathan, we hear reports now of tank movements in northern Gaza, which again, you know, that had been assumed as an area more or less the IDF had put in control, had pulled out its ground troops. Now tanks moving in, reports of Palestinians trying to make it back from the south to the north, and the IDF sending leaflets telling them no, not to do it, even though that is a goal or a prerequisite for a Rafah operation. So I'd like to get your assessment of just what's happening in Gaza right now.
I think that we have two alternatives very clear. One, the meeting point between releasing the hostages and increasing the military activities, again, operational, are not meeting. And at this moment, concerning the situation that just was described about the situation of the hostages, bringing us to a very critical moment. You can stop now the fire, you can make a deal of releasing the hostages, and then you will see how the situation of the military activities will be developed. The military activities, and when I'm hearing all the time the name of Rafah, Rafah is not a symbol for a victory. Rafah is something that we need to complete the military structure of destroying the structure of Hamas with 4 battalions and making the line between the border Gaza and Egypt under kind of another kind of coordination or cooperation to prevent smuggling. And now IDF is centralized in activities like happened in Shifa Hospital. It means you identify an area that needs a treatment, you are maneuvering a battalion or a brigade of armor or with infantry together, and I think there are signs that shows us that we are on a way towards Rafah. What is going in the central area of Nuseirat, what is going with in other areas shows that we started activities towards Rafah. But Rafah is not the full victory that Bibi Netanyahu described. So what is the option? Not for the IDF. The IDF is making his mission in a very clear way. The mission now on the war cabinet cabinet is to decide whether you are going to make now agreement for the hostages, later on continue with your activities. Meanwhile, by the way, IDF and the Israeli government reduce the delegitimation concerning humanitarian aid.
Well, I want to just read President Biden, by the way, though, even though it's interesting, he tweeted just, I believe in the last hour, in the 12 days following my call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, 3,000 trucks with food and supplies moved into Gaza, a daily increase of over 50% from the week prior. It's still not enough. We continue to urge Israel to ramp up all land and sea deliveries from Gaza civilians. Jonathan, this is the kind of like barring the government is in because of the other, as we heard, there's criticism also with all that aid pouring in, there's less reducing pressure on Yahya Sinwar.
So I think that sadly, what many have been saying for a long period of time, Hamas never wanted a second hostage deal. They were buying time until Ramadan so that Israel wouldn't launch the offensive on Rafah. They bought enough time by teasing, dangling the hostages in front of us. And now that time has passed and we still, and I agree totally, we are not applying military pressure on Hamas. This isn't military pressure. When the IDF wants to apply or is told to apply military pressure, people feel it. That is not what's happening in Gaza now, and Israel is stuck in between providing humanitarian aid and trying to overcome the real challenge of humanitarian aid, which is distribution inside the Gaza Strip. It's not the amount of trucks, and for the president to quote the amount of trucks, that's a huge misunderstanding of really the challenge. The challenge isn't how many truckloads are brought in or dropped from the air, is how are they delivered to those who need it and not taken by Hamas. So where this leaves us is in a horrible reality regarding the hostages, which in my mind leaves us with one option: to go in and take them out by force wherever we can, which we haven't really exposed so far. And the second thing is that now it should be clear to everybody around the world, and most importantly to US policymakers, that Hamas never wanted a deal and that they've said no to the most lenient terms and the longest way that Israel could ever move forward. Since that is the reality, what needs to happen now is for Israel to say, okay, then we move on.
Okay, I'll just note that if the U.S. is bringing in Turkey as a mediator, I'm not sure that reality does not appear to have actually arrived to the rightly or wrongly to the Biden administration. But we'll have to see how that develops. Now, among the many blows suffered by Israel since October 7th has been the one to the economy. The war has crippled such key business sectors as construction and tourism and forced the government to dramatically increase its expenditures to both fund the military effort and care for the tens of thousands of Israelis forced to evacuate their homes. Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics has released figures now showing that the country's gross domestic product, its key economic indicator, dropped during the last 3 months of 2023 by a whopping 21% over the previous quarter. That's this drop right at the very end of the chart there, only comparable to that big drop during COVID. That was during the COVID period. And by the way, this was well more than was estimated. Now, the forecast for this year that was issued by the International Monetary Fund yesterday isn't any more promising. The IMF sees GDP growth in 2024 of 1.6%. That's below the Bank of Israel's prediction of 2% growth. It's almost half of the IMF's last prediction of 3.1%. Now, the figure's even more pertinent this week amid talk that Israel's military effort may even have to expand in the coming months. Well, for more, let's speak with Avi Weiss. He's president of the Taub Center, professor of economics at Bar-Ilan University, joining us from Petach Tikva. Avi, it doesn't look good. How bad are these numbers?
Well, they're certainly not good, but they're not really that unexpected. The Bank of Israel, of course, has slightly different predictions than the IMF. The Bank of Israel is, interestingly, more optimistic for 2024, but less optimistic for 2025. The interesting thing is actually if you add up the expected growth in 2024 and 2025 together, you get the same thing whether you're talking about the Bank of Israel or the International Monetary Fund. They both come out to about 6% because the International Monetary Fund, to about 7%. The International Monetary Fund has Israel growing at 1.6% this year and at 5.4% next year. The Bank of Israel has 2% this year and only 5% next year. Both of them add up to about 3.5% a year. So that's a good level of growth.
But isn't that predicated on a belief that this conflict will have been over by this year? I mean, I'm just going to point out, for example, we've heard reports, I think an economist serving with Israel, or former one, said Israel spent over $1 billion just this weekend to defend itself. And the government just today approved this Takuma plan, which is going to cost, they say, 19 billion shekels. That's over $5 billion just in the south, never mind what's happening in the north.
There's absolutely no question that the cost to Israel is very, very large of this entire war. The $1 billion that is stated, well, the finance ministry, I think that it's about half that. But independent of whether it's half that or whether it's $1 billion, that's an incredibly large amount that happens only over less than a one-day period. So there's no question that there are costs to the Israeli economy. The question of growth is a different question than than what you do with the money. The growth is the value of what's being produced. And that can continue to grow. There was a big hit in 2023 because of that last quarter, but that can continue to grow slower this year. And then the assumption is that Israel will be able to make that up next year, which is what happened with COVID also, where Israel lost early on. But later on, they were able to make that up and actually did better than anybody had expected them to.
Well, that's because there was a vaccine that was developed, but people are asking if there is this conflict, for example, should become a regional conflict. Never mind the military cost, the human cost, even economically, if Israel can expand its conflicts now on other fronts, even regionally against Iran, given the impact it's having, just the war in Gaza and what we're seeing in the limited action in the north is having.
Well, any estimates of what's going to happen are dependent on things not getting worse than they are now. In other words, if it turns into a full-fledged war with the Hezbollah or with Iran, then all bets are off. Then the numbers are going to be much, much worse than anything that you see right now in terms of costs, in terms of the effect on the economy, in terms of the unemployment, and everything is going to change very significantly if and when that happens. But the Bank of Israel has actually been more optimistic than the World Bank and then S&P were. If you actually take a look, going back in December, I believe we did it, the Taub Center that I'm part of, together with the Aaron Institute, put out a study in which we had estimated that the growth would be 1.5%. So it's very close to what the IMF said now. But you've got to basically separate between two issues. The issue of how much this is costing the Israeli economy, and it's costing it a lot, and the issue of growth, which is a separate issue. I mean, it's connected, but it's a separate issue because it deals with how fast is your economy growing. And there, Israel has shown a lot of resilience. And the Bank of Israel actually thinks that since historically Israel has been very resilient after skirmishes, wars, battles, whatever it is, has really bounced back very quickly, they sort of expect that to happen now also. But again, this is assuming it doesn't spread.
All right. At any rate, certainly this is going to be a costly chapter for Israel. It's a question of how quickly the Israeli economy, which has bounced back from other wars, but this is turning out to be quite a long one. And it doesn't seem
much longer than anything we've seen.
Right, and doesn't seem to right now to be an end in sight. Avi Weiss there of the Taub Center. Thank you for that. Jim, I do want to bring up a related issue here, because President Biden, writing in the Wall Street Journal today, an editorial calling on Congress to pass these aid bills that are now in front of it for both Israel and Ukraine, military aid. I just mentioned these reports. He said maybe it was only $500 million just for one weekend and one defense. But the question is literally about whether Israel can afford Iran, and whether it could do that and engage with Iran and potentially alienate the United States at a time when it's going to need that aid, and how much that has to be a factor. Daniel, I'll let you start, because from the diplomatic angle, this has to be assessed.
Well, I mean, the answer is obvious. I mean, certainly Israel shouldn't feel that it's entirely dependent on the United States in making its decisions. There is a certain amount of flexibility that that the Israeli government must maintain, and I believe that the Biden administration should and will understand that. I mean, nobody's
though Congress may not. Well, parts of Congress may differ.
So that's the other side of this. That there is. It has unfortunately become part of a political, internal political game within the U.S. Congress. You might attribute it also to the last few years, where, in a sense, Israel has lost the solidity of the bipartisan support. So, I mean, 15 years ago, I don't think that aid to Israel would have been an issue that could be played where you can play one party against the other in the U.S. Congress. It simply wasn't an option.
This is an unprecedented situation.
So this is an unprecedented situation. But having said all that, I think that there are priorities for the Israeli government to think about. And currently, the level of support that the Biden administration has shown Israel in the last 6 months is worth considering certain flexibilities when it's not a matter of life or death.
We have about a minute, but I just want to ask our military experts, can Israel even sustain a limited air war with Iran without at least getting the support of the U.S. in terms of replenishing its arsenal of its defense systems?
First, and I'll be quick, obviously no. In this current situation, Israel doesn't have the military-industrial base, and it doesn't have enough supplies to do so by itself, and I don't think that it will have to. I think that eventually the diplomacy and the interactions between the countries will be settled, and that this package will pass. AIPAC will make sure of it, and eventually Israel will have what it needs to defend itself.
I can give you 25 seconds.
Absolutely no. Israel needs United States. The adventures that we are going to face in the coming years, we have to look further on with the war and with the impact of this war. Also, depth the depend of between Israel and the United States. We need this support. We don't have any capability to do it by ourselves, and we need to strengthen it, and we need to work on it besides the level of the security figures. On the political level, this is our main problem now.
All right, Ambassador Daniel Sheck, Eitan Dango, Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much for joining us. Let's end on a sort of positive note out of all this darkness. Burning Time is the name of a band which was formed by 3 young men who are living in communities near the Gaza border. They survived the October 7th attack, are now pursuing their dreams of rock stardom. As they face this new reality, they're trying to incorporate their experiences into their music. Ari Shapira and Karmit Malko have their story. Let's take a look and listen.
Itai, Matar, and Grisha were normal teenagers when they formed a band and dreamed of the first single they would release. On the morning of October 7th, it seemed these dreams were shelved, and with them the routine life that they now miss so much.
I woke up and heard a lot of booms. I thought, okay, this is normal. I went to the safe room, and then suddenly my father tells me that there was a terrorist infiltration.
At that time, we didn't know the source of the fire, if it was ours. And then they started saying that the terrorists had entered all of the communities, and it was an unpleasant surprise.
Itai was staying in the safe room in his home in En Absor, Matar was in the bomb shelter in Kibbutz Urim, and Grisha was in a safe space in Moshav Yesha. For hours, they used the phone to keep track of what was going on with their friends.
I have a friend who was between 2 places that were conquered, and the last message I received from her was that she heard gunshots and was afraid. Then they cut the internet, and I didn't receive a message from her for 9 hours. She's alive. The community was not occupied, but there were hours of fear.
I have many friends who are dead or kidnapped, people who are close to my family. We moved away. We tried to find peace of mind, but all the time there are messages about abducted, dead, funerals. It's tough.
After a day, they were evacuated under heavy security. Each of them went to a different safe place, Itai to Eilat, Matar to Yakum, and Grisha to Haifa. Out of the harsh reality that befell them, and alongside the anxieties and the difficult stories about their friends who were kidnapped or murdered, they continued to write and play until they managed to meet and record an album. Tomorrow May Be Brighter is one song from the album.
a song full of pain about that brutal morning of October 7th, and also full of optimism, a song for us, the adults, who can learn a lot from it.
Tomorrow will be a better day. All of this will be over and we won't have to be in fear that friends will die. Even though I have friends who were murdered and kidnapped, and also all the hostages will return.
Tomorrow may be brighter if all this war was over. Our love will go on free and fill the air. No more calls for safety, no one runs away. No more warning with a red flare.
Telling the story through music, which maybe expresses, couldn't express